Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Musical Talk. My name's Nick Hudson. Two discussions today. The first one is with Professor Robert Gordon about Caroline or Change. Everybody's talking about Jamie and the girl from the North Country, and a myriad of other topics that we dip in and out of. And the second is a discussion, the second is a monologue, I guess you could say, or soliloquy, that Michael Shapiro had with himself about Love Never Dies, a show that we've always enjoyed here on Musical Talk. Contrary to what Mike says in his review, I actually did enjoy it. I saw it 4 times and I've only seen Phantom once. So I think that sums up my feelings for Love Never Dies. Let's go on with the discussions. Robert, hello.
Hello, Nick.
How are you?
I'm very well indeed.
Well, that was a good episode. Good night. But I want to talk to you about 2 shows that were on the Oliviers that we haven't mentioned here on the podcast much at all. Now, of course, you've seen them both, Robert. We've talked to death about Hamilton on the show. We talked about 42nd Street. We talked about Young Frankenstein. And you know, we love all those shows. But I want to talk... Well, I want you, Robert, to tell me about The Girl from the North Country and Everybody's Talking About Jamie. Because we haven't on this show, so they were nominated for some awards. Everybody's talking about Jamie didn't win any, but it had a very spirited performance on the award show itself. Girl from the North Country won Best Supporting Actress and some other bits and pieces, didn't it, I think?
I can't quite understand the fuss about Girl from the North Country. The first thing that surprised me about it was that it got a 5-star review from Michael Billington. Now, I normally trust Michael Billington as, I think, the sort of senior theatre reviewer in this country. He doesn't always agree with me, and he doesn't.
He's better than Quentin Letts.
Oh, yes, a lot. He's very reliable and very scholarly in a way, in that he researches carefully the plays, and he knows everything. He's a compendious knowledge of theatre. So I do trust him, though, of course, you can't always agree with everything a critic writes, but I was really shocked when and it had generally very good reviews. When I actually saw the show, I thought the drama part, I'm not talking about the way they do the Bob Dylan music, which is wonderful. I mean, they interpret and sing the songs beautifully. But the drama that was written by Conor McPherson, I found very cliched and in some ways rather inauthentic. I don't think that the show at all, the play part of it, reflects a knowledge of the kind of people from the area in the south of America that it's supposed to reflect. I found it most unconvincing.
I guess the obvious question, Robert, for me is, what's it about?
Well, it's set in Minnesota during the Depression. And the problem was, as I say, I never believed in these characters. I never believed that the author, who's Irish and brilliant at evoking Irish milieu, understood or grasped the milieu, the society of the people he was talking about. And that's very important because some of the reviews said it echoed 30s American playwrights like Eugene O'Neill and Thornton Wilder.
Do you think it would have been better if it was set in Ireland using Dylan's music? Or would Dylan's stuff not work in that?
I think the Dylan stuff was supposed to be there to add to the authenticity of the environment, but it didn't. It didn't. So you'd have needed Irish songs for a play if it was set in Ireland.
So did the songs help the evening for you?
The songs were the best part of the evening. I mean, okay, Bob Dylan is a great singer-songwriter, but when you hear the songs done in the theatre by different voices and interpreted quite dramatically, they are startling and brilliant.
Because there was a Bob Dylan jukebox musical on Broadway a couple of years ago, and it died a very sad death.
Well, this is odd because it doesn't feel like a jukebox musical, but it feels like a play that's been written surrounded by a series of songs that, quite frankly, don't have all that much to do with what's going on in the action. So it's like the songs are there as accompaniments to set mood and tone. And I don't quite know it's a great gimmick because it's obviously what keeps the show running. There are lots of Bob Dylan fans out there who will want to go and see it. And for them, I would kind of recommend it. But as a piece of musical theatre, I found it strange and most unsatisfactory.
Do you think with shows like this that we now have a new genre of musical theatre, musical play with songs? How long have these been going on for, where you have, like Brief Encounter, for example, where we have songs commenting and enhancing the action, but not necessarily moving it forward, but they're not jukebox?
Yes, I think you're right. I think actually what we've been calling the jukebox musical as a kind of subgenre has expanded enormously, and I think the turning point, in a way, was the huge success of Mamma Mia, because, of course, there were lots of jukebox musicals in the preceding 20 years. For example, the most famous Buddy, the Buddy Holly story.
But I don't consider that a jukebox musical. That's just a play where the songs are entirely, here's the word again, diegetic. But then you're getting these weird plays that are having songs that aren't diegetic. They're not. I mean, I don't know much about Girl from the North Country. If there was an on-stage band and they're part of the story,
they're not part of the story.
Right. So
they're just there, and the characters step out of role occasionally to sing these songs. No, but I think in general terms, whether you see people called the Jersey Boys a jukebox musical, but as you say, that's just a collection of Jersey Boys songs with their biography woven into it as drama.
Whereas We'll Rock You and Mamma Mia, they invent
stories.
And Our House, brilliantly.
Yes.
They are proper jukebox.
Yes, well, I think Our House and Mamma Mia are brilliant. I think Mamma Mia is incredibly witty in the relationship between song and what's going on in the drama on stage. And Our House is very moving and very appropriate in terms of the use of songs. I think it is an expansion of the possibilities of the jukebox musical, but it didn't seem to me like a musical, that's all. It just seemed to me like a play surrounded by interesting songs.
Could they have worked harder, and would you have enjoyed it more if they made more efforts to integrate the songs better, do you think?
Yes, but I think to do that they would have had to rewrite the book radically. I think it's the book that's the problem, and I think Conor McPherson, excellent playwright though he is, this is not his genre. This is not his genre, and this is not his milieu.
Nice design, nice performances. Everything else was.
The design is efficient, effective. Performances are very good.
So we're in Hampstead at the moment, and we have the Hampstead Theatre, where Caroline Will Change is playing, I believe. I
saw it at the National in the original George C. Wolfe production that came from New York.
I saw it with you.
Okay, don't even remember that.
I do. It's one of the most boring evenings of theatre in my life, but I don't think I got it.
I didn't like it the first time round. I found Tonya Pinkins really rather over-the-top, overacting. I found that the first time round it was portentous, it was pretentious, and I didn't like the music. Seeing it the second time in a totally different production, this is often the case actually when American shows are done well by British directors. I thought, and of course at the Hampstead Theatre, it's a fairly small theatre, I thought this doesn't have the Broadway slick feel that it had initially, which I resisted. It's a charming sort of folk tale style retelling of what I think is Tony Kushner's childhood experience of his relationship as a little boy who is on stage and their Afro-American maid. It's about racism. I think it's a worthy subject. I think it's fairly well handled because it's very personal. It doesn't try and take on the whole issue of racism in a very didactic way, but it's very much about the individual relationships, the guilt that the liberal Jewish family feel.
I think Scottsboro Boys probably did it better, in my mind.
Well, Scottsboro Boys is very, very different, and Scottsboro Boys is shocking and startling and brilliant. This is small scale and intimate, but I must tell you that I thought Sharon D. Clarke was a revelation. She didn't overact, but she sang brilliantly.
Was she the radio or the washing machine or the...
She played the maid.
Right.
The washing machine and the radio are played by a kind of chorus.
Right. I quite like that concept.
Yes, that was quite fun, as was the bus. It was superbly performed, very well directed, and I actually liked the show a lot better this time. Perhaps I've just grown accustomed to the idea. What I still don't like is the sort of quasi-operatic approach to musicalising the story. I'm not a great fan of Janine Tesori.
Well, I was going to say, do you think it's a precursor to Fun Home?
No, in no way.
Are you looking forward to Fun Home?
I've seen Fun Home in New York, and I'm going to see it again. Yes, okay. Fun Home is a great show.
But that's Janine Tesori as well. So
yes, well, the trouble is, this is Janine Tesori trying to write a through-composed show, and I thought I'm not a great fan of through-composed shows at the best of times, but in this case, I thought it would have been much better as a play with songs, a traditional musical.
I think from what I remember, the upstairs stuff bored me a lot musically. It was the downstairs, the pastiche, the blues, the gospel, the rock that I think if they had, when the child goes downstairs and meets that's when it should have entered musical theatre territory, and it should have been a straight play upstairs.
That's an interesting perspective. It might have been much more convincing that way.
But it's coming to the Playhouse Theatre, I believe, which is...
Yes, I certainly think it's worth seeing. I think people will enjoy this production. As I say, Sharon D. Clarke is sensational, and the whole production is good.
Everybody's talking about Jamie apart from us, so I want you, Robert, to talk about Everybody's Talking About Jamie.
Well, okay, so I'm talking about Jamie now. I thought it was delightful. I think, first of all, it's a British musical, and we don't see enough of those in the West End. Secondly, This
comes from the Bristol Old Vic, is that correct?
No, it comes from Sheffield.
Sheffield.
The Crucible Theatre, Sheffield. It's set in Sheffield, so it's really about that location. It captures for me...
It's everything Kinky Boots should be, isn't it?
Well, it is, because Kinky Boots should have been done by Brits. Kinky Boots, for me, feels totally inauthentic. Not for a moment do I believe these are people from Northampton in Kinky Boots. But in Everyone's Talking About Jamie, it feels like these people are from Sheffield. The music is appropriate. It's great pop music. It's the kind of music that kids would sing or dance to at school, after school. I felt that it was lively, it was charming, it was moving. It was quite obvious in some ways, the very politically correct, very liberal view of a young gay boy who wants to be a drag queen. I thought the drag queens could have been a little more emphasised. That would have been interesting. But I thought that, and sometimes the oppositional characters were very, very clear villains, and they weren't sketched in with enough detail. But there is a sensational performance from Josie Walker. A sensational performance from Josie Walker, who steals the show in one song, and a sensational performance by John McCrae as Jamie, really very convincing, as well as from his friend Pretty, played by Lucy Shorthouse. She's his Muslim friend, who wears a hijab and spectacles, and she's a very sort of serious young woman, but very liberal in her attitudes.
And because she wears spectacles, we have to assume that she's very smart. Yes.
Well, yes, she is, and she wants to be a doctor.
Is it a new Billy Elliot, do you think?
Not quite, but it's moving in that direction. It's a more intimate musical than Billy Elliot.
My one worry of it is that it's pop songs on stage, and this has been a long issue for me ever since the beginning of Musical Talk. Did it bombard you with false rhymes and bad scanning? And
no, it's well written. The songs are well written. They're appropriate to the context. They are in a pop style, but it's certainly what I would call real musical theatre. It's not a pop song with a story attached.
But not good enough to win any Olivier's, which is interesting.
Well, I don't agree with all the awards that were handed out at the Olivier's.
What else are you looking forward to seeing, Robert?
Well, I'm very much looking forward to seeing Hamilton. I haven't seen it yet. I don't think that I will be gaga about it in the way that the critics and audiences seem to have been over the past few months, because I know quite a lot about it and I've heard the CD. But I think that it certainly sounds interesting and ambitious and worth going to. You've seen it.
I have seen it, yes.
What did you think of it, Nick?
We talked about it loads on the show, but I really, really enjoyed it. I don't think it's for me. I appreciated the technical brilliance of the writing. It did stuff with songs that I'd never seen personally done on stage before, though I'm sure you have, Robert. I wished it had more stuff happening on stage as regards scenery, but I can see the director's vision behind it, even though he didn't win the Olivier Award for Best Directing. The lighting is amazing, the choreography is brilliant, but it's all about that score. You know, it's a show where the writing really is at the forefront of it. It doesn't. Maybe if it had flying sets and stuff, it would detract from the quality of the piece. But I think it's overhyped. I don't think anything is worth the hype. It's certainly very good, but you know, there's certainly an element of. We talked about this before. There's certainly an element of you have to see this show, and if you haven't seen this show, you know you're not part of musical theatre.
I think that's what happened because of the hype in New York. Really, it's been taken over, and they obviously know, the producers know it's a good thing to keep hyping it. I wonder when it'll run out of steam in London, because I don't think that it's a show that can appeal as much to a British audience as to an American audience.
We seem to love it, though.
Oh, they do.
Yeah.
Audiences do. The other show I'd like to just mention, but I didn't like it, I'm afraid, but it was very well reviewed, was The Grinning Man.
Now, this is one I do want to see, because I liked Shock-Headed Peter.
This is Shock-Headed Peter, very, very light.
Did you see Shock-Headed Peter?
Yes, it's one of my favourite great experiences in the theatre. No, I think this is you put your finger on it. It's trying to be Shock-Headed Peter, but it's...
But is it the same writers, though? Or is it the same composer?
No, I don't know.
It's not that Tiger Lily's doing...
I'm not sure who it's Tom Morris is the director,
right.
And he's clearly inspired by Shock-Headed Peter, but I don't think it's adapted by Carl Gross. I don't think that it's interesting that nobody in the reviews have ever seems to mention the composers, and that's a problem. But I think, apart from the music, which was okay, I thought the storytelling was appalling, and I've seen very slow, very long-winded, and I've seen so many shows with puppets. Could we please have a show without puppets in the next few years? Let's get...
Regent's Park Theatre says no, though I've seen the artwork for their Little Shop of Horrors.
Oh, yeah, and that's got puppets.
Well, it looks like a drag queen might be playing Audrey too, which has been done before.
Oh.
Which I quite like the
but
idea.
Not a puppet playing the drag queen.
It's going to be an actual drag queen coming out of this plant, which I quite like the idea of.
Well, that sounds like fun.
I don't know how it's going to eat the dentist, but I'm sure that'll remain to be seen.
But, you know, certain theatrical gimmicks become cliches after a few years, and since Warhorse, where puppetry was used brilliantly, we've just had so many shows with puppets. It's no longer a novelty.
Forbidden Broadway did a song years and years ago called "Taking You Gotta Have a Gimmick" from Gypsy, and saying you got to have a puppet. It was a time when Little Shop of Horrors, Avenue Q, and something else were on, and you know it's. But there's something quite... I mean, Brief Encounter, we talked about a couple of weeks ago, that had sort of puppets in it.
Pinocchio had puppets.
Pinocchio had puppets, yes. Should we talk about Pinocchio? Because we haven't mentioned it on the show.
We have talked about it, I think.
Did we? Well, let's mention it briefly again. Still playing.
Well,
you said we left, Robert, and you said it's the best musical the National have done in a very long time.
Well, that's not hard. Because the National haven't been famed, in my view, for producing good new musicals.
Apart from Follies.
Yes, but that's not a new musical. No. I thought that Dennis Kelly had done a really good job in taking what is already a dark story, but taking a Disney film and making it into a full-scale stage musical. I would have liked one or two more songs. I felt the puppetry was effective. However, I would love to have seen the puppets' mouths move. since they played a large sort of had large speaking roles. But I thought that the darkness and the visual stylization was superb.
It did need more songs, and it's a shame because the composers and lyricists are dead now, but we were treated to new musical material, which we'd never heard before, which I did like, these kind of cut songs from the Disney Vault, which they just gave the National absolute access to, which must have been amazing.
And also expanded versions of the songs that already exist. And
it reminds me of something going back to National that Bryan Cranston said when he won his award for Network, which isn't a musical. And I always say this, he said, we are so lucky, regardless of whichever political party is in power, to have a government that funds theatre. He said it shouldn't be something that we should have to fight for, it's just a right that we have as British people, which is really, really nice.
Yes, I so much agree with that, but I have to correct some...
I probably quoted it completely wrong.
No, slight mistaken impression in Cranston's view. We had governments that used to fund the arts. They no longer fund the arts adequately, and one must, I think it is one's duty as a citizen, to fight at every point for that to insist that both governments, Labour and Conservative, both parties, make a commitment to funding the arts, not only because they are a good thing for every citizen, but because actually they bring in huge amounts of money to this country. The arts as an industry is the most successful industry in this country, and it could bring in much more money than most of the other failing industries that we have in this country.
I remember at the Olivier's when Matilda won equally the same amount of awards as Hamilton did, though not as many as The Cursed Child. He said that schools should prioritise theatre and music even over science and maths, because creativity is the key to everything. If you understand the creative arts, you can do absolutely anything else in the world, and that got a round of applause.
Yes, I'm sure of that, and I think educationalists know that.
You come from both sides of the spectrum.
Yes, well, educationalists know that, but I think that, and so many, if you think of somebody, just an iconic figure like Einstein, was a great musician, and so... it stands
and Bach was a great mathematician as well.
Exactly. And, of course, there's a direct link between skill in music and skill in mathematics. But if you have healthy, good and well-educated people in this country, we need the arts. But as I say, even if one made a pragmatic argument, at the moment, I think that the tragedy is that artists themselves are funding the arts, particularly in theatre. The pay the salaries and the money that actors and singers earn in the theatre is woefully inadequate. Yes, of course, there are a few stars who are being paid a lot on television and in film, but not in the theatre. And I think that is something that needs to be rectified. And I really think if this government invested money in expanding, for example, the film industry, it's clear, it's obvious when you go to awards like the Oscars every year, the number of prizes that we win internationally is disproportionate to the size of the country. This is something we should exploit.
But I think Brian's point was that in the end of this speech, I wish this would travel over the seas to America. Obviously making a point that they have nothing like the national.
Well, with Trump in power, it's not likely to.
And I think that was the whole point of the thing. But 2018 has been a really good year, I think. We're only a few months in, but the kind of season, we don't really do seasons here, but one can look at it as like the tax year from April to April, because it's when one Olivier Awards to the other. There seems to be a lot more quality in the past 12 months than... In
musical theatre, I think that is true. I'm not sure it's true in all theatre. The standard of performances, acting and directing...
We had Cursed Child last year, so that...
Yeah, the standard of performances continues to be high. But I think that the standard of new plays is inflated by critics' desire to support new work.
That's possibly why the critics loved Girl from the North Country.
Yes, I think you're right.
Sometimes their aim is just to support these shows.
Yes, and they overrate something that in conception is adventurous, even if in education, in realization and execution, it's lacking.
But yes, it's been a good year, I think. A good tax year for musicals.
Well, if you think the same year that produced probably the greatest production of Follies that there's ever been, as well as Hamilton, as well as, on a totally different level, something like Everybody's Talking About Jamie, that really is a good year.
And Young Frankenstein as well, which I did enjoy.
Well, I enjoyed Young Frankenstein, but it's not a masterpiece.
No. Mel Brooks is a genius, Robert. Well, but thank you very much, and we'll have you on again soon.
Thank you, Nick.
You're listening to Musical Talk, the UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, Musical Talk. Mike Shapiro here. I've just come back from seeing Love Never Dies at the Segerstrom Theater in Costa Mesa, California. And I thought you might be interested in a quick 5-minute informal impressions piece. You may ask, Mike, why did you go all the way down to Orange County to see this when it's playing considerably closer to you at the Pantages Theater in Hollywood? And the answer is there's nothing like an hour and a half drive in traffic to make you really appreciate musical theater. So, onwards. Love Never Dies. I went to the show ready to hate it. I know it had gotten trashed by the reviewers. I know Nick scoffed at it. I just went in with very low expectations. It seemed like a opportunistic piece, a chance to drum up a little more cash from Andrew Lloyd Webber's many loyalists who have fond memories of the very long-running original musical, Phantom of the Opera. I guess I should mention this is a sequel to Phantom of the Opera, just in case you, the listener, were not aware of this. So I went in with low expectations. I ended up liking it considerably more than I thought I would. And if not for the ending, I would say that this would be a subdued but respectable follow-up and wrap-up to Phantom of the Opera. Coming nowhere close to the grandeur and memorability of the original, but offering an interesting little dramatic coda that is musically interesting at points and sincere. That said, I did take issue with the ending, which I will not reveal to you, but I will talk about in an indirect fashion. So big picture-wise, what's going on in Love Never Dies? It takes place 10 years after Phantom of the Opera. And Christine has accepted a prestigious gig to debut a piece for Rodgers and Hammerstein, or at least for Hammerstein. And en route to meet up with Hammerstein, she is mysteriously deceived and waylaid and brought to a secret, opulent residence of some kind in fabulous Coney Island, which at the time, I guess this is early 20th century, is kind of a seedy carnival sideshow, kind of a miniature underworld of questionable moral character on the boardwalk. And Christine has shown up there, and she's waylaid by guess who? Yes, you guessed it. It's the Phantom. And he's concocted another elaborate scheme to try to win her heart and win a performance from her. In particular, he has written a new song and very much wants her to perform it, which is, I guess, tantamount to declaring her love for him in his mind. That's how he sees it. Along with Christina is her husband, Raoul, who we remember from Phantom of the Opera, as well as her new son, who I believe is named Gustav, but don't quote me on that. I will shy away from revealing too many plot complications, but suffice to say that the gang is back together, including some other characters from Phantom, including Meg and her mom. And it's kind of a rerun in some senses of Phantom, in that the Phantom he's set up a scenario where he wants Christina to show her fealty and love to him through this symbolic gesture, and Raoul and others have to oppose this. And Christina has, as she did in Phantom, conflicting loyalties, because on one hand, the Phantom was her tutor. He brought out her musical talent. He is very devoted. On the other hand, dude's a murderer. So real mixed emotions there. It's nice to be wanted. Can't argue against that. Nothing wrong with an admirer, but yeah, he's not the most savory of characters. So that's kind of the big picture of the show. Things progress in an operatic fashion. We tend to see the sense of the inevitable coming long before the characters do. And the real question is, how is this going to play out? If Christine has a question of loyalty between the Phantom and her husband, how is she going to decide, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'll shy away from revealing the plot more, but it's an interesting follow-up in some ways, since Phantom really was left open-ended. The Phantom got away from the mobs at the end of the first musical, and we weren't really sure what his designs would be on Christina. So there's a lot of dramatic moments. There's a lot of passionate musical exposition. There's a lot of hand-wringing. There's a lot of what you would expect in a quasi-operatic piece by Andrew Lloyd Webber. The music was pleasing, more than I thought it was, more than I thought it would be. There's no one theme that really grabs at you. There's nothing you're going to walk away with singing, this is a great tune. But there are quite a few respectable numbers. There are some dark, haunting pieces that I found very effective. They were harmonically interesting, almost cinematic in their harmonic textures sometimes. The title tune is a bit stock in its chorus, but when performed in context, I actually found myself liking it. There's the obligatory rock and roll number, dropped anachronistically in the middle of the early 20th century. Would it really be an Andrew Lloyd Webber show if there wasn't some egregiously out-of-date rock vocabulary? It feels a little bit jarring, but it does accompany a really interesting moment in the story when the Phantom makes a unexpected discovery, which, again, I'm not going to spoil for you, but it's an interesting moment for him as a character. It's the first time we really connect with the Phantom and sympathize him because he discovers a relationship he did not anticipate having, and he is taken for a loop. He's thrown for a loop. And what's interesting about this moment is that he's usually holding the cards, and we see him flabbergasted, not merely heartsick, but absolutely thrown for a loop. So that's fun. And that is accompanied by this more rock musical style piece. What else? There's a lot of solid scoring, honestly. There's no tune really will linger with you. There's a lot to like. So we're finally brought to the ending of this piece. And the ending of the piece, which I will not reveal, is nonetheless extremely unsatisfactory. And at least it was to me. The problem the show has is it doesn't quite ever decide whose story it is. We're left wondering, well, is Christine the protagonist? She doesn't seem to do a lot other than get swept along by the tide of circumstances and make an important decision here or there, but by and large, she's not driving the story. Is Raoul the protagonist? Of course not. He's just kind of a dandy, and he's got some drinking problems and some gambling problems, and he's more there to serve as a plot device. Gustav, too young to really be a protagonist, which leaves the Phantom as the putative protagonist. And problem is, as I mentioned, dude's a murderer and also kind of crazy. So he's not a very satisfying protagonist. He's a great classical, tragic figure, someone with whom we can partially sympathize, even though we see that he's gone terribly wrong. But we can't bond to him in the way we need to for the lead character in a musical. The ending, in how it plays out, not only feels a bit arbitrary and capricious to me, it acts as if the Phantom is the protagonist figure, and I don't feel like he's really earned that place in our hearts during the course of this show. I will say no more. I do encourage you to see it, but perhaps not to drive an hour and a half for the pleasure, and maybe wait for discount tickets or the inevitable movie adaptation. This is Mike Shapiro, signing off.
For more information about Musical Talk, please visit our website at musicaltalk.co.uk. You can email us at feedback@musicaltalk.co.uk, listen to past episodes on iTunes and YouTube, and follow our social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.